Before he was the voice of a revolution, Patrick Henry was a failure. He failed as a storekeeper, not once, but twice. He failed as a farmer when his house burned to the ground. By 23, he was a married man with children, and no trade, no money, and no prospects. The kind of man a town quietly writes off. So he did the only thing left to a desperate man with a quick mind. He borrowed some law books, studied for a few weeks, and talked his way past the examiners into the bar. And the moment Patrick Henry stood up to speak, everything changed. Because it turned out, the man who could not sell a sack of flour could do something almost no one else alive could do. He could take an idea and set it on fire in the hearts of everyone listening. He had found the one thing he was born for: his voice. His first great case should have been a small one. The colony's clergy were suing for back pay, and they had the king himself on their side, for the king had struck down a Virginia law to favor them. Henry, barely a lawyer, rose to defend the colony, and in front of a packed courthouse, with his own father sitting as the judge, he said the thing no one said out loud. A king, he argued, who annuls good and useful laws, is no longer a father to his people. He becomes a tyrant, and he forfeits all right to their obedience. The room gasped. Someone cried treason, but the jury was with him, and when it was over, the crowd lifted him onto their shoulders and carried him out into the street. A backcountry lawyer had just told the British Empire, to its face, that a king could lose the right to rule. The fuse was lit, and the colony had found its voice. 2 years later, the crown reached into every colonial pocket with the Stamp Act, a tax on paper, on documents, on the very business of daily life, passed by a parliament an ocean away in which Americans had no vote. Henry, now a young member of Virginia's House of Burgesses, stood and offered a set of defiant resolutions. And then he spoke. Caesar, he said, had his Brutus, Charles I, his Cromwell, and George III, and here the older men shouted him down. Treason! Treason! George III, he finished, may profit by their example. If this be treason, make the most of it. He had just named 3 kings and the men who brought them down, and dared his own king to hear the warning. No taxation without representation was no longer a grumble in a tavern. It was a line drawn in the open by a man who would not lower his voice. By the spring of 1775, the talk had run out. British troops held Boston, and Virginia trembled on the edge between submission and war. In a crowded church in Richmond, the cautious men counseled patience, more petitions, more waiting, more hope that the king would relent. Patrick Henry rose to answer them, and delivered the words that would outlive him by centuries. They tell us, he said, that we are weak. But when will we be stronger? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? And then, his voice falling almost to a whisper, before it broke like thunder. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death. The room sat in stunned silence, and then it rose as one. Virginia would arm. The revolution in the South had its battle cry, and it would never again be unheard. He had told them the war was inevitable, and he had welcomed it. Let it come, he had said. I repeat it, sir, let it come. And it came. The colonies declared their independence, and the man who had set Virginia ablaze was chosen as the first governor of the new free state. The voice that had called for the fight now had to sustain it, scraping together troops and supplies for Washington's starving army, holding the home front together through the long, dark years. He served term after term, trusted by his people as few men ever have been. But Patrick Henry never mistook the cause for himself. He had not fought to trade one distant master for a nearer one. He had fought for a single thing, the same thing he had always fought for. And now he was watching, very carefully, to see whether the new America would keep it. Liberty. When the war was won, the leaders gathered in Philadelphia behind closed doors to write a new constitution, a stronger national government to bind the states together. They wanted Patrick Henry there. He refused to go. "I smelt a rat," he said, in Philadelphia, tending toward the monarchy. And when he read what they had written in secret, his unease hardened into alarm. Here was a powerful president who might become a king. Here were standing armies and taxes and a distant central power reaching back into the lives of ordinary men. And nowhere in it was there a plain promise to protect the freedoms of the people. He had spent his whole life warning that power left unchained always grows toward tyranny, whether it wears a crown or not. He was not about to fall silent now, simply because the new masters happened to be his own countrymen. The greatest fight of his life was still ahead of him. In the summer of 1788, Virginia gathered to decide whether to accept the Constitution, and the fate of the whole young nation hung on her vote. For 3 weeks, Patrick Henry held the floor like a force of nature, speaking sometimes for hours at a stretch against the young, brilliant, soft-spoken James Madison. "Liberty," Henry thundered, "ought to be the direct end of all our deliberations. The first thing, the last thing, the only true measure of any government. Give us that precious jewel," he said, "and you may take everything else." He warned them that a government strong enough to do everything for you is strong enough to do everything to you. That this Constitution, for all its beautiful features, squinted toward monarchy. He was not against union. He was against handing away, without a fight, the very freedoms a generation had bled for. And he demanded, before Virginia signed anything, a written guarantee of the rights of the people. He lost. Virginia ratified the Constitution by a razor's margin, and Patrick Henry went home, beaten. But losing was not the end of the story, because he had frightened the winners into a promise. To answer his objections, James Madison took up his own pen and drafted a list of guarantees the federal government could never cross. The freedom to speak, to worship, to be secure in your own home, to be tried fairly, to keep what the powerful could not take. We call them the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution exist, in large part, because one man refused to trust any government with unguarded power. In the years that followed, he was offered everything: a seat in the Senate, the office of Secretary of State, a place on the Supreme Court, and he turned them all down, wanting only to go home. He had never hungered for power. He had only ever wanted to guard liberty from it. From the first cry against the king to the last stand against his own countrymen, Patrick Henry never changed, never wavered, and never sold the one thing he could not sell. And that is the measure of a strong man. Not what he is willing to win, but what he refuses, ever, to surrender.